hello again. Thank you for being patient. I'm here with one of my boys, Muggsy, and his brother might video bomb us shortly. And I apologize, one, that there's a noisy airplane going overhead, and two, that it's taken me longer than expected to do this follow-up video. I'll see if I can wait for it to pass. The downside of recording outdoors. So, wanted to do a follow-up talking about publishing and some thoughts on the direction that the industry appears to be going, and also some of the pros and cons of traditional versus self-publishing. So when I say traditional publishing, what I mean by that is you get a contract with a publishing house, and they publish and distribute your book. And I hear a lot of people say things like, oh, they take care of all the marketing for you. That is not true. It probably was true. Muggsy wants to get down, apparently. Sorry. It was true probably at some point, but that has not been true for a very long time. So I'll tell you about my experience with traditional publishing, and that will probably be about the length of one short video. And then I'll probably do a second one to talk about the different forms of self-publishing, and also there are hybrids, which we'll talk about probably along with self-publishing. So, the benefits of traditional publishing is that while they certainly do not take care of all of your marketing and publicity for you, but they do a great deal. So the benefits are, it gives you credibility to a certain extent. That's changing. The stigmas around self-publishing are slowly changing, but they are still there. If you have a traditional publisher, it's much easier to get a bookstore to carry your book, and it's much easier to get a bookstore to host you and do author events, which are one of my favorite things. It's a lot of fun. It is still possible with self-published, but it is absolutely not as easy. So one of my books, Queen Up, which is a self-help tarot guide book, that was traditionally published by Konari, which is an imprint of Red Wheel Weiser, which is a pretty well-known name in the New Age metaphysical spirituality genre. Initially, I had self-published that, and I would email different bookstores, even small bookstores, independent bookstores, trying to get author events, because I was doing a lot of workshops back then. And usually I wouldn't hear back at all. As soon as I had a publisher, a good 6 months in advance, you start lining up your calendar for events, and contact a lot of the same stores, and you get a response, and places are very eager to have you. And so there's this understanding that first of all, I should say, when you do an author event, and this is going off topic, I apologize, but when you do an author interview or when you do an author event, it doesn't mean the person has read your book. These days, folks are super busy. I once had a friend who is an author. When she first published, she was really surprised that somebody interviewed her on a podcast and had not read the book. These days, I'm more surprised if somebody has read the book in advance, just because they're super busy. So it's not personal. But understand that if somebody has a bookstore, even like an indie bookstore, a small bookstore, as much as they want events and they want people coming in, they take a risk when they use their shelf space. So if your book is published with a traditional publisher, they sort of have an unspoken guarantee that, there's been a certain level of vetting. There's been a certain level of editing. That doesn't mean there won't be typos. There usually are, especially these days. But there's a certain level of quality that they would expect. And so again, the one benefit is that it gives you that credibility. It's easier to, amp up your book tour and get into different places. There are some places, including some conferences and festivals and contests and things like that, that are not interested in your book if it is self-published. So some places you are kept out of unless you have a traditional publisher, but again, that's changing more and more. Oh, okay, here comes my other boy. Gotta stop for a puppy kiss. Okay, so other benefits are you do get extra levels of editing, and that is very important. Please don't think for a minute that you are such a great writer that you don't have to edit. My self-published stuff is edited numerous times by me, numerous times by my very meticulous partner who has Virgo ascendant and Pluto on the ascendant, and even then there is stuff that gets by. And more recently, even books that are traditionally published, you're going to see typos come through, especially on the first printing. So it's normal, but there's a lot less errors when you have extra eyes, and that happens when you have a traditional publisher. You can certainly pay an editor, but if you're going to pay a good quality editor, it is going to cost a lot of money. And when we talk about not traditional, when we talk about self-publishing, I'll talk more about that. So again, when you have a traditional publisher, there's a lot of work that is done for you, but don't think that all the work is done for you. It is not. So with Queen Up, I was on tour for about 2 years straight. It was a lot of fun. They hooked me up with a bunch of gigs. They connected me, the publisher, connected me with a lot of bookshop owners that I never would have met otherwise, wonderful people all over the country. So there's connections that they have that I would not have had on my own, and I would not have thought to research and make on my own. So there was definitely a huge benefit to that. But at the same time, contracts are different. Contracts vary. So some people get a travel stipend, some people don't. I did not. So, all that travel. I was sleeping in airports and in bus stations, some of those trips, and in my Toyota Yaris, and Airbnbs for some of those trips. And some of them I stayed in, really cool hotels. It depended on the arrangement I had with the store. But don't assume some of these things are going to be the case. Some traditional publishers give you an advance. A standard advance for nonfiction might be a couple $1,000s. For fiction, sometimes it's more. You'll hear of people getting these exciting double-digit $1,000 advances. Those are not what everybody gets. The $1 million advances, that's not what everybody gets. Most times with really good publishing houses, your way in is through an agent, but that is not always the case. I have never had an agent. I was very fortunate to get a contract with Konari without an agent. There is a really great book by a man, I think his name is Michael Larson, I'll double check on that, about how to get your book published, and he goes into detail on traditional versus self-publishing. So if you're looking for a traditional publisher, you are going to create a book proposal. Think of it like a business plan. If you've ever made a business plan, it is a business plan for your book. It is not 20 pages of how wonderful your book is and why everyone in the world will want to read it. In fact, if you try to market your book by saying everybody wants to read it, it will go right to the slush pile. And I say that because a book proposal is really a marketing plan. The publisher wants to know, is this a topic that has enough interest that it's going to sell with the publisher doing as little work as possible? I don't say that to imply that publishers are lazy. What I'm saying is, like every other industry, they are trying to make a profit. So if your book is such a hot topic that they can be pretty well reassured that you're going to sell and make money and do very well, and they'll sell out their first running, that makes them more likely to take a chance on you. Another thing they want to know in your book proposal is, who are you and why are you the person to write this book? So if it's nonfiction, that goes into what is your expertise? How does the book relate to your experience? Fiction's a little different. Some things about you might be, does the book tell a fictionalized story of an own voice's experience? That's a really big thing. So that will kind of boost your proposal up there and make it more attractive. Other things about you, do you have any experience? That's not really a huge issue. They're not going to necessarily chuck your book proposal just because you don't have an MFA. In fact, one of the bigger things, and this is probably more depressing, one of the bigger things they look for is, do you have a large following? So you can have no writing experience, an engaging topic that's sort of current and hot, and a huge social media following, and you will more likely get a book proposal than somebody who has an MFA and 2 followers on Twitter. And again, it comes down to marketing. If you have, you know, a million followers on social media and only 10% of your followers buy your book, that's still impressive to a publishing company. So that's the kind of thing they're looking for. They're looking for how connected are you, how easily can you move books? Can you get them off the shelves and into readers' hands and keep those readers satisfied? So your credibility counts, but your network counts more. And there's I have many mixed feelings about that. There's pros and cons to that. So some things to consider. Now, sometimes people will say, well, I don't do social media. Does that mean I'll never get a book contract? Never say never, but just know it's one of the big things they look for. Also, I've talked so far about, I might have to do another traditional publishing video because this is getting a little bit longer than I expected. There's also a difference between like a big publishing house and one of the smaller boutique publishers or indie publishers. Sometimes indie publishers are a lot more forgiving and willing to take risks with a new author or an author who doesn't have a huge following. Especially if it's like a real niche publisher. So for example, my novel Quiet Man, I pitched it to a niche publisher called Ashland Creek Press, which they specialize in like environmental, vegan type of themes. And they turned it down because the style was not a good fit for them. And it really wasn't. You know, if you've read my fiction, it's really dark. It's kind of, you know, disturbing, and their stuff is, from what I can see, their stuff is more like inspirational, like trying to get people interested in taking care of the environment by sharing stories that are uplifting. My work is definitely not uplifting, but they're a really good example of like a niche press, and there are niche presses out there probably in every genre. So the things that are important for like a big publishing house, like having an agent, having a million social media followers, those things aren't as important for a smaller publishing house. And actually, I'm going to stop here and do another video about the different types of publishers still under the umbrella of traditional publishing. So thank you for watching.